Philosophy of Hinduism by Babasaheb Ambedkar. Question 3, Part 14. King Trisanku, one of Ikshvaku's descendants, had conceived the design of celebrating a sacrifice by virtue of which he would ascend bodily to heaven. As Vasishtha, being summoned, declared that the thing was impossible, Asakyam, Trisanku travelled to the south, where the sage's 100 sons were engaged in austerities, and applied to them to do what their father had declined. Though he addressed them with the greatest reverence and humility, and added that the Ikshvaku regarded their family, priests as their highest resource in difficulties, and that after their father, he himself looked to them as his tutelary deities, he received from the haughty priests the following rebuke for his presumption. Asakyam. Fool, thou hast been refused by thy truth-speaking preceptor. How is it that, disregarding his authority, thou hast resorted to another school, Shakha? The family priest is the highest oracle of all the Ikshvakus, and the command of that veracious personage cannot be transgressed. Vasishtha, the divine rishi, has declared that the thing cannot be, and how can we undertake thy sacrifice? Thou art foolish king, return to thy capital. The divine Vasishtha is competent to act as priest of the three worlds. How can we shew him disrespect? Trisanku then gave them to understand that as a preceptor and as his preceptor's son had declined compliance with his requests, he should think of some other expedient. In consequence of his venturing to express this presumptuous intention, they condemned him by their imperception to become a Chandala. As this curse soon took effect, and the unhappy king's form was changed into that of a degraded outcast, he resorted to Vishwamrita, who, as we have seen, was also dwelling at this period in the south, enlarging on his own virtues and piety and bewailing his fate. Vishwamrita commiserated his condition and promised to sacrifice on his behalf and exalt him to heaven in the same Chandal form to which he had been condemned by his preceptor's curse. Heaven is now as good as in thy possession, since thou hast resorted to the son of Kusika. He then directed that preparation should be made for the sacrifice and that all the rishis, including the family of Vishishta, should be invited to the ceremony. Disciples of Vishwamrita, who had conveyed his message, reported the result on their return in those words. Having heard your message, all the Brahmins are assembling in all the countries and have arrived except Mahadoya Vasishtha. Hear what dreadful words those 100 Vishishthas, their voices quivering with rage, have uttered. How can the gods and rishis consume the oblation or the sacrifice of that man, especially if he be a Chandal, for whom a Kshatriya is officiating priest? How can illustrious Brahmins ascend to heaven after eating the food of a Chandal and being entertained by Vishwamrita? These ruthless words all Vashishthas, together with Mahodaya, uttered, their eyes inflamed with anger. Vishwamrita, who was greatly incensed on receiving this message by a curse, doomed the sons of Vashishta to be reduced to ashes and reborn as degraded outcasts, Ritapa, for 700 births, and Mahodaya to become a Nishada. Knowing that this curse had taken effect, Vishwamrita then, after eulogizing Trisanku, proposed to the assembled rishis that the sacrifice should be celebrated. To this they assented, being actuated by fear of the terrible sage's wrath. Vishwamrita assented and himself officiated at the sacrifice as Vajakas, and the other rishis as priests, Ritvija, with other functions, performed all those ceremonies. Vishwamrita next invited the gods to partake of the oblations. When, however, the deities did not come to receive their portions, Vishwamrita became full of wrath, and raising aloft the sacrificial ladle, thus addressed Trisanku. Behold, O monarch, the power of austere fervour acquired by my own efforts. I myself, by my own energy, will conduct thee to heaven. Ascend to that celestial region which is so arduous to attain in an earthly body. I have surely earned some reward of my austerity. Trisanku ascended instantly to heaven in the sight of the Munis. Indra, however, ordered him to be gone, as a person who, having incurred the fear and curse of his spiritual preceptors, was unfit for the abode of the celestials, and to fall down headlong to earth. He accordingly began to descend, invoking loudly as he fell the help of his spiritual patron. Vishwamrita, greatly incensed, called out to him to stop. Then, by the power of his divine knowledge and austere fervor, created, like another Prajapati, other seven rishis, or constellations so called, in the southern part of the sky. Having proceeded to this quarter of the heavens, the renowned sage in the midst of the rishis formed another garland of stars, being overcome with fury, exclaiming, I will create another Indra, or the world shall have no Indra at all. He began in his rage to call gods out, also into being. The rishis, gods, suras, and asuras now have become seriously alarmed and said to Vishwamrita in a conciliatory tone that Trisanku, as he had been cursed by his preceptors, should not be admitted bodily into heaven until he had undergone some lustration. The sage replied that he had given a promise to Trisanku and appealed to the gods to permit his portrait to remain bodily in heaven and the newly created stars to retain their places in perpetuity. The gods agreed that these numerous stars should remain, but beyond the sun's path, and that Trisanku, like an immortal, with his head downwards, should shine among them and be followed by them, adding that his object would be thus attained and his renown sacred, and he would be like a dweller in heaven. Thus was this great dispute dusted by a compromise which Vishwamrita accepted. When all the gods and rishis had departed at the conclusion of the sacrifice, Vishwamrita said to his attendant devotees, This has been a great interruption to austerities which is incurred in the southern region. We must proceed in another direction to continue our penances. He accordingly went to a forest in the west and began his austerities anew. The end.